Okay, I may have stopped that last video a little shorter than when I wanted to, but no problem. We'll just pick this up. So Descartes' new philosophy, remember, was to start over, to start from scratch, to build everything new by himself, and he was going to use something that was called the method of doubt. And this has a pretty stringent um, piece of it that we're going to regard as false anything that could possibly be wrong. Okay, so if there's any reason why something might have been wrong, we're going to throw it out and we're going to try to go through all our beliefs to try to find out if there's anything that's left when we're done. Okay, so part 4 starts off, I ought to reject as absolutely false all opinions in regard to which I could suppose the least ground for doubt, in order to ascertain whether after that there remained anything in my belief that was wholly indubitable. Okay, so we need a principle here to kind of group things. We just can't go through every single belief. And so I'm going to add a few things in from the meditations that aren't mentioned in the discourse. So the first thing that Descartes looked at was philosophical beliefs. And here he has an interesting argument. Every philosophical doctrine is disputed by other philosophers. So doubt is possible about philosophical beliefs because philosophers doubt them. So we can't use that. So out goes philosophy. The other thing would be science. But science, he says, is not set on the firmest foundations. It's a relatively new discipline. So doubt, again, is possible. We could have all science wrong. Okay, and so there's a picture of people looking through Galileo's telescope, and nobody believed what they saw because they thought it was some sort of a trick. Okay, so again, it's this principle. If there's one reason, one tiny reason why they have to be thrown out, we're going to throw them out. That leaves common sense beliefs. And perceptual beliefs, well, we either got beliefs about the past, the future, or the present. Well, the past comes from memories. Memories could be faulty, so there is one reason to throw out memories. Beliefs about the future are based upon induction. What he means is we kind of figure out what's probably going to happen, but that's probably, so if there's another reason they could be thrown out. And then finally, beliefs about the present. And this is where we're now sort of kicking into what the discourse says. Well, two things about the senses. First, the senses deceive us. Okay? It's possible that some sense experience be wrong. And even if there is some sense experience that we would never doubt, Descartes raises a very interesting thing here about how do we tell the difference between sensation and a vivid dream? And this might be something that you might be skeptical about. Okay, he claims there's no way of telling the difference between, at least that some dreams fool us into thinking they're real, and there's no way inside the dream to figure that out. It's often thinking back upon it and comparing it to other experiences that we know. Okay, so if we get rid of all those things, and then Descartes says, so I'm getting you to the cogito to see how this is working. Immediately I observed that whilst I was thus wished to think that all was false, it was absolutely necessary that I who thus thought should be someone. And as I observed that this truth, I think, therefore I am, there's the cogito ergo sum, was so certain and of such evidence that no ground of doubt, however extravagant, could be alleged by the skeptics capable of shaking it. I concluded that I might without scruple accept it as the first principle of the philosophy of which I was in search. So there's his basic reasoning, how this seems to be, most people will accept this. I mean, if I'm being fooled, at least I must exist. I may not know what I am, but I must exist because something has to exist to be fooled, and I'm feeling I'm being fooled. So even if I'm completely fooled, I can't be fooled that I'm being fooled. Okay, so there you go. So I must exist. Now, what's interesting is what Descartes does with this. So he takes this and he's going to build us all the way back up to thinking that we can believe that the world that we see is basically what's really there. So how does that work? And it's a multi-step process, and I'm going to try to run you through the steps right now and just give you a sense of how that works. And then we'll talk about some of the implications of this. Okay, so we start off with I think, therefore I am. We start off with the idea that I cannot be wrong, that I'm existing, and so this is something that's certain. Remember those principles for adopting through. Don't accept anything unless you can know that it's true. Okay, so here's how this argument goes, and I'm following roughly part 4 here. So, cogito ergo sum. So there he concludes that if that's true, then I must have ideas. If I'm existing and I'm thinking about things, I have ideas. And then he says, this is an interesting argument, I must be distinct from my body, because ideas are not physical things. So he concludes, I was a substance whose whole essence or nature consists only in thinking, and which, that it may exist, has need of no place, nor is dependent on any material thing. So we have a separation between physical things and spiritual things, mind and body. Okay, he's absolutely certain he's a mind. He's not certain yet that he's a body, even though he believes he's a body. Now, whatever I perceive clearly and distinctly is true, he says that's really my basic principle. And so then he offers an argument for the existence of God. I perceive clearly and distinctly that the existence of God is the only adequate cause of my idea of God as the perfect being. So we've looked at some proofs for God's existence. This is a very different kind of one, that if I think of God as a perfect being, I have to have gotten that idea someplace. And Descartes says I can't have got that idea from myself because I'm not perfect, so it must have been put in my mind. And it could only have been put in my mind by a perfect being. Something to think about whether you find that convincing. Okay, so then the move, number 7, therefore God exists. So now I exist and God exists. So what? Well, God is perfect, God is all-powerful, He is good, so He wouldn't let me believe something so strongly if it was wrong. He would have stopped that. So what are the things that I believe so strongly that God wouldn't have let me believe if they were wrong? Well, one thing is this principle I was using to prove God's existence. Whatever I perceive clearly and distinctly is true. So that must be true, because if that's an important principle and I really can't get it out of my head, so why would God have left it in my head? That seems to be Descartes' thinking. Okay, this is sometimes referred to as the Cartesian circle, because he used this principle to prove God's existence, and then he turns around and with God's existence he verifies the principle he used. So that sounds like arguing in a circle a little bit. Okay? And then also another thing that he has a strong natural tendency to believe is in the existence of a world outside of himself. Okay? And that our ideas are caused by it. So he says, well, that must be true, at least in general outlines. Otherwise, we would be massively deceived by God. So he concludes now, material objects, including my own body, exist. They do not necessarily exist as we perceive them, but they nonetheless exist. And so what have we got here is a justification for scientific research, that we can now do science. And we know that there's a world existing out there, and we can learn more about it. So science's methodology and objects of study now have a metaphysical guarantee. Philosophy has verified scientific research. And science has also been reconciled with religious belief, because if you think about religious belief as belief in God, we've just shown that science can't be justified unless we all believe in God. So it looks like everything's coming back together in a way, if Descartes can hold it there. Okay, so here's a summary of the rebuild, the 3 basic steps. I'm certain that I exist, I'm certain that God exists and is a perfect being, and I'm certain of my belief in a world outside myself and that it is basically the way I perceive it to be. And what does philosophy do? Well, it looks like it's doing 2 things. It justifies science, and it studies entities that science doesn't study, like the human mind and God. Okay, so let's stop there. The big question now is to see if Descartes can hold this together, and that this could be really the whole modern world being put together with the cogito.